The Winnipeg General Strike was the biggest worker strike in Canadian, if not North American history. It left an impact on the working class, the country, and governments at all levels. The real question is, who is in the wrong and who is in the right? Let's begin with the causes of the general strike. Frustrated soldiers returned home from the Great War, World War I, to find their former jobs taken by immigrants. After years of sacrifice during the war and high expectations of normality, these soldiers were met with high unemployment and inflation. The building trades and metal workers were unhappy with their wages and working conditions. Their councils, for their principle of collective bargaining, voted on whether or not to begin a workers' strike. The majority of the councils voted for the strike and appealed to the Trades and Labor Union, a central union body representing the interests of many of Winnipeg's workers. The union voted in favor of supporting their endeavors. Every organization but one had voted in favor of the general strike, and the rest is history. On Thursday, May 15th, 1919, virtually the entire working population of Winnipeg, around 30,000 people, had gone on strike. Their plan was to suspend all public utilities, shutting down the city and effectively forcing their demands to be met. The Winnipeg police had voted in favor of striking, but remained on duty to prevent the city from going under martial law. On June 10th, the federal government ordered for the arrest of 8 strike leaders. The mayor of Winnipeg at the time, Charles Frederick Gray, read the riot act on June 21st to 25,000 strikers at the market square. Fearing violence because of the growing number of protesters, Gray called in the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, who rode in on horses, beat protesters with clubs, and fired their weapons. This day became known as Bloody Saturday, as numerous people were injured and 2 strikers were killed. Winnipeg came under military occupation, and the strikers' newspaper called Western Labor News was compromised. Many more strike leaders, editors, and protesters were arrested for their roles in the strike. At 11 a.m. on June 25th, 1919, the strike was officially called off by the Central Strike Committee, and the strikers returned to work. There were 2 sides to the general strike, the Central Strike Committee and the Citizens Committee. The Citizens Committee of 1,000 was comprised of Winnipeg's influential manufacturers, bankers, and politicians. The reason that this committee was created was because the leaders of Winnipeg's businesses were losing money. The bankers stepped in the opposition as they were losing money as well. They had power in both Winnipeg and Ottawa due to leading members in the Citizens Committee convincing federal cabinet ministers that this strike was a revolution in the making. They told them that the soldiers brought back support of the Bolshevik Revolution from Eastern Europe. This convinced the government, and A.J. Andrews, businessman and lawyer, was appointed special agent in Winnipeg. He believed that the government must proceed in crushing the strike quietly and carefully to prevent any violence or bloodshed. This was eventually a hypocritical statement, as Bloody Saturday was exactly the name to describe itself. The fear of revolution and this committee fueled their opposition of the Central Strike Committee, and in some ways, their opposition was needed in order for there not to be a revolution in all of Canada, something that could have ratified the entire country. Remember though, there are 2 sides to every story. Now that we understand the opposition, we can understand the clash in unions. The one big union did not organize or lead the strike, but had a big role in the strike's roots. It grew with Western Canadian workers' interests in the new ways of organizing unions in society. Radical ideas came with warm welcome from many trade unionists in the ending years of the First World War. Many workers turned out to hear the union leaders speak well of the 1917 Russian Revolution and to criticize the federal government for its decision to ban socialist newspapers. At a meeting of the Winnipeg Labor Council, one delegate said, "In Winnipeg tonight, we are fighting with ideas, but soon we will be fighting with rifles." Western Canadian Unionists spoke out of a number of radical resolutions before the delegates at the year's Trades and Labor Congress convention. They wanted the Congress to abandon craft unionism for industrial unionism, but questions of censorship, war effort, and conscription defeated every one of their proposals. The Western Canadian Unions arrived in Calgary for a meeting in the spring of 1919, no longer interested in proposing any of their ideas to the TLC, Trades and Labor Council. They believed the time had come to create a new industrial union that would use the general strike as a weapon. The new union was named the One Big Union and organized all Western workers into a single body. It would not divide workers by skill or concentrate on unskilled labor. By moving to create one big union, the Western Unionists had created many enemies for themselves: business, government, and craft unions. They all felt threatened by the EOBU. The EOBU's strength was that the growing conviction of Western Canadian workers was fueled the common interests, unions, and united political action. The EOBU would become entangled in the general strike and would never recover from the defeat. The EOBU's main interest was that of the people, of change, and of equality for workers in all trades and craftsmanship. The workers of the EOBU argued that they simply on strike for fair living wages and the right to negotiate. That alone should make you think that the workers were in the right, and the citizens, government, businessmen, and bankers were in the wrong. I'm here to tell you the opposite. In many ways, the strike was necessary for the Western workers to get their point across to the employers and big guns of Canada. But the way the Central Strike Committee looked to accomplish this was not the way it should have been done. The Central Strike Committee stated that they did not wish to start a revolution, but with their support of the Russian Revolution, it's hard to believe that they had no intentions of infecting the government. Their so-called peaceful strike wasn't as peaceful as many people thought. This famous picture of protesters tipping this streetcar is a perfect example. The workers were told to stay off the streets and inside to prevent the government from coming up with an excuse to use force to end the strike. The citizens promised the city that it would be returned to ordinary operations through volunteers who operated public utilities and other services. This committee did more than just to attempt to restore public services. The citizens replaced the city's police, who voted to join the strike, with special constables who would defend the city from protesters' attack on the city. The committee sought to portray the sympathetic strike as completely unnecessary, a threat to private and public property, as well as an expense to the city, the employers, the workers, and the citizens, civilians, just as it was. Lastly, we will end with the aftermath of the strike and the final conclusion of this video. The strike ended with the jailing of strike leaders, many of which would run for office. Leaders had so much popularity due to their involvement with the strike, 3 would win the election to the legislature. Even more incredible, John Queen, one of the people sent to jail for the strike, was elected mayor of Winnipeg in the following years. The OBU would survive for many years as a small regional union that was led by R.B. Russell until 1956. Many have continued to disagree with the strike's meaning. The debate between historians today is whether the strike was simply a local conflict between employers and employees, or whether the strike was part of an international response and part of working people to the inflation crisis created by the First World War. Those who say it was a local conflict over simple wage and conditional issues are critical of strike leaders, saying that they failed to recognize that a general strike would bring them into conflict with the government and lead to likely defeat. To these historians, the strike was counterproductive to their movement. That is honestly why I agree more with the citizens and disagree with the workers. The workers should have used a better platform to get their point across, maybe a petition or something around those lines. Instead, this counterproductive strike lessened strikers' paycheck, and some happened to lose their jobs. Those who see it as a part of a national and even larger international movement agree there was no conspiracy in 1919. Workers had come to see themselves belonging to a group that stood in opposition to employers. The strike was not only about the right to negotiate, but those workers' right to have a greater say in the way the post-war world would run. The General Strike was a huge event in Canadian and Western Hemispheric history. The Central Strike Committee and the citizens of 1000 duked it out for over 1 month. The citizens the victors in that short time, but the workers the winners in the long run. Before I go, I leave you with one question. What would happen if the entire working population of the world went on strike? And as always, thanks for watching.